Hi, I'm Damien, this is Callum, we're both from Young Independents and we're speaking to Freddy Vachha. Freddy, you are the chairman of the London region. What's it like campaigning in one of the most Remain areas?
I didn't join UKIP because it was going to be easy. London represents a existential problem for UKIP and it prepares us, but it also gives us backbone, it gives us purpose, and it furthermore allows us to see what we are really up against, a demographic shift in this country which is remorseless and inexorable. And we have to find both relevance and an ability to communicate our ideas effectively without being lampooned as successfully in the mainstream media as we have been over the last few years, with a series of, I'm afraid, lame duck leaders, one after another, just walking into it. The mainstream media are our enemy. We know this. We don't have to be told this or reminded this. They will twist and distort what we do. We can't let them determine what the agenda is. Definitely not. We set the agenda, but we do it in a way that protects us against the most outrageous of their distortions. We're a party which exists for all people, irrespective of their religious beliefs or lack of religious beliefs, irrespective of whether they came from an economically successful or perhaps less successful background, childhood background, irrespective of whether they're an entrepreneur, a business person, or an employee, or even, hopefully only temporarily, on the dole. We should appeal right across the board on basic principles of speaking for those people who do not currently, who have not hitherto had a voice. And that's what UKIP should be about. We are an agile party in a country which has had its history based on being agile, inventive, intelligent, leading the world, not because of brute force, but because of doing things better and sometimes more honorably than others. Of course, we made mistakes. When we made bad mistakes, we say sorry.
So I was speaking to you earlier and you were quite critical of what you perceive as Battens' leadership as interim leader. How do you think he has approached this and could he have done any better?
I play chess at a very serious level. I believe that attribute should be perhaps one which past leaders of UKIP could have focused their minds upon. In chess, you think ahead. If you don't think ahead, you get slaughtered. If you're not that bright, you get slaughtered anyway, even if you do think ahead. But if you don't think ahead, no matter who you are, you're going to get done. You have to think, what are things going to lead to? The path which UKIP and its leader embarked upon in the summer of 2018 was bound to lead to where it did. And that, sadly, is a wipeout on our European Parliament representation. Of course, I wanted us to have zero MEPs, but I wanted us to have zero MEPs for the UK, not just for UKIP, because we didn't want to be in the European Parliament or in the EU at all. But the wipeout which happened when there were European elections was foreseeable. That we got just 1.18% in the Peterborough by-election was foreseeable. Foreseeable back then, because the wrong decisions were made and then they were stubbornly stuck to. And good sense was not listened to. No one, certainly not myself, is bright enough not to not to have the need to listen to what other people say. To listen, to take into account wise counsel, to reflect, to decide what's best on balance. Being a leader and being a demagogue and a dictator are different things. I'd have said most dictators are very poor leaders. A leader brings out the best and inspires, does not drive out talent from a party. I have stuck with UKIP loyally because there's no one else to trust. Various other parties have emerged. If we could believe Boris Johnson, then there's no need for UKIP. Could believe Boris Johnson? I tackled Boris Johnson in November 2014 in front of a packed hall with 1,300 people seated and probably around another 700 standing in Walthamstow. And I had first-hand evidence of the integrity and wisdom of Boris Johnson. And based on my own personal experience with him, and his amnesty on illegal immigrants, and his statement to me that anyone who said that mass uncontrolled immigration was other than wonderful was frankly potty. This is a man who had expressed opinions on having sexual intercourse with vacuum cleaners, I remind you. Oh, yes, he did.
Not allegedly?
Oh, no, allegedly about it at all. He most certainly did. You have not been in UKIP for long enough, so you don't know that. Yes, he said the sort of person who leaves the Conservative Party to join UKIP was the sort of person who had sex with vacuum cleaners. I put it to the learned Boris Johnson in front of this large hall that somebody who entertained thoughts about sex with vacuum cleaners was hardly in a good position to lecture me about being potty. And that's because I know how to deal with politicians of the calibre of Boris Johnson. I fear to think what recent post-Farage leaders would have done on a one-to-one with Boris. For me, I'd just have won. I'd have won because I'd have outflanked him, outthought him, outspoken him, and because I'd have realized and recognized his fundamental lack of decency and morality. And I'm afraid somebody who makes that sort of statement after the watershed in a way that's going to be heard by kids, seen being reported in newspapers, talking about sexual intercourse with vacuum cleaners, and this guy is going to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Perish the thought. Having said that, the other chap, the Hunt guy, you mustn't tempt me into using other words. You mustn't. You really mustn't.
You're not Victoria Derbyshire.
You mustn't tempt me. I can resist everything but temptation. Jeremy Hunt is hardly any better. So Mr. Johnson showed his great degree of self-control and intelligence when I further put it to him that his continued support for the EU, because back in 2014 and in 2015, he was supportive of the EU, entirely supportive, and the EU had just placed a ban on the sale of new vacuum cleaners which developed more than 1.3 kilowatts. And I connected this with a personal fear that he might have had, given his predilection for discussing, oh, you mustn't laugh.
Will take twice as long, Boris.
Yes, indeed. It will take twice as long, but it might be safer and it might not pull things out too much.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, I'd leave Jesus out of it.
Right. No, because this is interesting, because there is actually a clip going around of Boris making a documentary about Turkey's membership of the EU. So I think it was long before 2014, if I've got my dates right, in which he's saying, why must we leave Turkey out for this reason and that reason? Are we being xenophobic by leaving Turkey out in this, that, and the other?
The Deputy Prime Minister of Turkey expressed an opinion that it was up to him, a woman laughing in public should be arrested and charged with a criminal offence somehow linked to public disorder. There was not a huge public outcry in Turkey, nor was he disciplined in any way for saying this. It was his private opinion. But I think people who express opinions like that, who are that close to being the leader of a large, ostensible democracy, don't really fit in with the ethos of Europe, unless we expand Europe to include the whole of the world. 3% of Turkey by area lies in continental Europe. The idea of Turkey joining the EU is preposterous. It doesn't fit in on any number of human rights grounds. And for the avoidance of doubt, and unlike perhaps other candidates for this position, I personally think that women laughing in public is absolutely wonderful.
Freddy, so what actually got you involved with UKIP? Why did you
Anger at what was happening both in this country and in Europe, and to a lesser extent in the world. I didn't want to be standing on the pavement shouting anymore. Before I actually put in my membership application to UKIP, I had been combining two of my skills. One of them is in computer programming. The other one is in making cogent and precise and concise arguments. I was waging war online in the readers' comments columns of the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph, the readers' comments were filled with EU-inspired or perhaps even EU-paid trolls who were there pushing the EU agenda. And there were any number of them. Well, me, together with my good friend who's called Mrs. JavaScript, we put paid to them. And after a few years, there weren't any left on the Daily Telegraph. And the Daily Mail changed the rules, so this was not so easy to do. But we put the case forward for leaving the EU very forcefully. Once this stage had been reached, I thought I better join UKIP. And UKIP spoke to me directly. I felt Nigel had skills which I lacked. His method of public speaking was very different from mine as it was then in the beginning of 2014, end of 2013 really. I felt the other person who was prominent in the EU Parliament, Daniel Hannan, his oratorical and presentational skills were exactly the same as mine. Mine was a machine gun method of delivery. Bang, 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 and God damn it, they did know when they were shot. However, there was nothing to learn from him because I did it just as he did it, perhaps a bit faster. Nigel was an entirely different kettle of fish. His mixture of charm and wit made me think, here's something to learn. And I've learned. However, I was never a Faragist or a Faragista. I'm afraid I'm not gender fluid. I'm very politically incorrect. I'm afraid I really think, except for a few rare exceptions, there are but two genders, and I'm one of them. I was never a Faragist, but many were, and it is a matter of some irony that the people who were the staunchest Faragists, who really indulged in hero worship, the man could do no wrong, are now the ones who are absolutely, well, they're, I don't know what the word are, Battenados maybe, and they are following the worship of Gerard Batten, which I'm sure is something which Gerard himself would not actually welcome. And so I certainly would not welcome. Start worshipping me, mate, and you're going to see a nasty side of Freddy saying, booger off. That was booger, please note.
And have you noticed in the news in recent times about the school which is trying to teach LGBT to children, and there's been a big backlash against this with Muslim campaigners fighting against this? What do you make of this, and what will your approach be to this?
It's a nuanced approach. I believe young children should have a time of innocence before the harsh realities of the world we find ourselves in are thrust upon them. They should have a chance to be children. And teaching them everything that could be taught very early on is probably not wise. It's not good. It's not good for kids. And I speak as somebody who used to be a teacher, though happily only of science subjects and only for more mature students, people at least in their teens, early to mid-teens. Here we have two darlings of the left, perhaps in collision. So some people are quite chuffed at this and are chuckling. I hope you're not one of them, because it's bad form to chuckle, or even to snigger. Here we have people who sincerely believe that, some of them, due to religious convictions, that being gay is evil or bad or something preventable, coming into collision with people who believe in cultural Marxism. And the point is that the Labour Party is irretrievably linked and irredeemably linked to both groups.
Which one do you think will win?
Who has more babies?
Well, that would be the Muslims, I would imagine.
Oh, that's your answer, sir.
If homosexuals...
Gay people are perfectly free to adopt, and I have no firm views about that, as long as the welfare of the child is allowed to be paramount, which it should be, and not sacrificed to some political agenda. Further, I generally believe that all other things being equal, don't you dare edit this bit out, all other things being equal, and they never are, children are probably better off being brought up with in a stable environment where they can feel happy and comfortable and part of a majority, rather than feeling part of a small minority. Whatever it takes for that to happen should happen. Now, there are many exceptions to that, but that should be the starting point from which adoptions and other things are decided. Why did we get onto this subject? Because otherwise, people who are in purely gay relationships are not going to have children, unless children are introduced by some other means.
But it's interesting to me that you say
You asked me the question as to who would win.
the folks who have more babies will win this argument. I'm not naming as to who that is. What do you make of these wider community issues which that community
I was
might
asked
find?
by Islam TV, why should any Muslim join UKIP? They never asked me that question again. The cameraman was and the reporter were both probably Muslims, judging from, in the case of the reporter, the accent. And my reply was as follows. I was asked this extempore. I said, because they love their children, because they want to be prosperous, they want to be happy, they want to feel secure, i.e. all the other reasons why anyone else should want to join and support UKIP.
Shouldn't segment people.
So, why on earth should it be different for Muslims? Are you a racist? That's what I asked the cameraman and the reporter. The cameraman started grinning. The reporter told the cameraman to switch off the camera. I think they'd realized they'd lost. And that is my sincere answer. We learnt in the West 500 years ago not to mix religion with politics, and those who do so at not just their peril. They have the freedom to decide on their own future. But unfortunately, at our peril too. We must keep these things separate. I am an agnostic myself, and I was born one, and will probably die one, divine revelations accepted. However, I support, in broad terms, Judeo-Christian values. I'm more than at home living in a country where the majority of people are Christians, in the sense that my mother was a Christian. She believed in forgiving people immediately, before they asked to be forgiven. She believed in helping others. These are capital C and or small c Christian values, and I believe in them hugely. Does that make me a socialist? No, it doesn't, because this is a normal trick by the left. Jesus was clearly a socialist, again an attempt to criminally mix religion and politics. No, I want to teach that man how to fish. I don't want to supply him with fish for a lifetime. And that's part of the reasons that I used to be a teacher.
And how would you approach the tough issues of Islamic extremism?
With the criminal law to the full extent possible. They're just criminals. They're murderers and criminals. If there's a special flavour and a harsher punishment can be given to them by also calling them terrorists, then they're terrorist murderers. But at the end of the day, they're murderers. The vast majority of Muslims are peace-loving people who couldn't give a flying fig for what's written in some ancient book, be it a Stone Age book or a more recent Dark Ages book. They couldn't give a flying fig.
I mean, this is definitely true. I mean, my best friend, I won't say his name, but there was a chap in college who was a good Muslim friend of mine who, in his spare time, liked to hand out pills and take alcohol and all this and the other. But
highly commendable activities.
Wonderful, except the pills.
All right.
But the thing I want to push you on here is I recently read the list of proscribed groups in the United Kingdom, groups you cannot be a part of because...
Proscribed groups,
yeah.
Yes.
So I read through them, and there were, I believe, 2 groups, I think Combat 18 and another one, that were far-right terrorists. There were a few Hindu groups, there were a couple of far-left groups, but overwhelmingly, this list was quite big, and it was overwhelmingly Islamist groups who try and mix politics and religion.
Indeed so.
So I do wonder, we have a
We
unique
mustn't do
issue
the
here.
same. We mustn't do the same.
I understand, but
Yes.
do we not have a unique
If we go
issue
through,
there?
well,
Disproportionate issue, I should say.
it is certainly disproportionate right now.
Yes.
I am a mathematician. I just do numbers on this. Yes, it is the number of terrorists nowadays who are affecting Western Europe, who are allegedly Muslim, or at least who profess Islam as their religion. They are disproportionately represented, hugely disproportionately represented. To solve this problem, we, either as a political party, UKIP, or as Great Britain, cannot declare some sort of absurd war against Islam. That's ridiculous. There are 1,800 million Muslims in the world.
You think that was...
With the birth rates the way they are going, in approximately 20, 30 or 40 years, there'll be more Muslims than professed Christians in the world. We don't declare war. We get help from all the moderates who also profess to be Muslims. And with their help, this problem can be solved. Without their help, it'll only get worse.
What do you make of Trump's approach to China in terms of his economic policies and how he's using things like tariffs to protect American industry?
Again, my approach on this is nuanced. When I decided to switch from teaching to accountancy and trained with the Big Four firm, which is now called Ernst & Young, I came across questions like this quite frequently. And they're pluses and minuses. In general, though, I'm a free market libertarian. I am opposed to tariffs. I believe markets should be left to sort themselves out. I don't believe in completely deregulated markets. Some markets, especially financial services ones, need a degree of regulation. Thomas Jefferson said bankers are more dangerous than armies, and he was completely right. However, in terms of manufactured goods and so on, I believe one should, by and large, leave things be. Let the market decide. If we can't make things as cheaply as the Chinese can, these are physical goods, and there is much evidence that we can't, the idea isn't to put up trade barriers and therefore encourage smuggling and all sorts of other things, because there'll be all sorts of people trying to find ways around it. These are akin to arbitrage in other markets. They'll find some way around it. We should simply try and adapt our own methods to either produce stuff smarter or produce stuff they can't still produce to be ahead of the game, and use our long history of excellence in manufacture. I ran a computer software house, Digital Precision, which produced software which by and large people said was impossible. Use Google, you can look me up, Digital Precision. It was my software house. I was through the vast majority of its existence, I was its sole director. I was its founder and progenitor and one of its principal programmers. We produced stuff that was better than the Yanks could produce, better than the Chinese could produce, better than the Italians, and most assuredly better than the Germans could produce. Vorsprung der Technik was us. We beat them on quality, and we continue to beat them on quality. And our competitors were years behind by the time they disassembled or decompiled our stuff using tools which we provided. We wrote the compilers and the decompilers and the disassemblers, which then they used to try and figure out how we did it. We moved ahead and we got better. There is a way to do this. Now, computer software is unique in some ways, but in other ways it's just another product. Do it better and the market will be yours. Why are we afraid of that? If we do not pursue excellence, now in this sense I'm an elitist, only in this sense I'm an elitist. I believe pursuing things and doing them as well as you can is really rewarded, and it's rewarded financially. I approached my own life in this way and set myself a goal. I have now reached a magic age where I can officially call myself middle-aged. But when I was a young man like either of you,
like him,
I set myself a goal. But by the time I was 30, I had to have made enough money through my numerous businesses, but Digital Precision was the prime one. In order so as not to have to be focused on money for the rest of my life. And I achieved that through extremely hard work which puts young doctors to shame in terms of number of hours put in. So I have limited sympathy with those who will not work to their full extent of their talents. Each person is only limited by what they think they can achieve. If they remove that, they can achieve more. If they remove that self-imposed restriction. This sort of thinking is common to free market libertarians like me. So I'm not going to defend tariffs in general. The EU, of course, is a hotbed of tariffs and quotas and all sorts of things. Right at the heart of it is, of course, the Common Agricultural Policy, which is though it's internal to the EU, it represents protectionism of the very worst form. When there are still people starving, largely in Africa and largely not due to causes which are external, due to internal wars, we have food rotting in Europe. But then, of course, this was the unholy deal which underpins the EU. The EU was a bribe from Germany to France. Give us your unstinting support in return for the huge subsidies to small and relatively inefficient French farmers. French farmers are far smaller than their UK equivalents, far less efficient by any metric, by any measure. And we will give you a subsidy for leaving your land fallow, for being inefficient at producing food and other agricultural products and byproducts, and in return give us a free ride and give us a protected market for our BMWs and our Audis, where we can trade them free from competition from whatever Ford might send over, or perhaps more relevantly for whatever Nissan and Honda might send over, and Toyota. This unholy protectionism underpins the protection racket that is the EU, which we are from whose shackles we are trying to extricate ourselves. So I'm hardly likely to defend Trump on this. Look, Trump's not my cup of tea on many ways, but he's a jolly sight better than Hillary Clinton was. Hillary Clinton was a lefty, she was a racist.
Pretty low bar, isn't it?
It was a very low bar indeed. It was a low bar even by EU standards. But I do not have a vote in US elections. I would have said he was the better of the two in this case. My own choice would have been somebody who was more libertarian than he is. But I do have some faith in Donald Trump. He is putting American interests first as he sees them, something which is seen as a crime, apparently, in Western Europe nowadays, which is bizarre.
The question I wanted to ask Freddie was, you're running as leader. Now, love or hate Mr. Battens' approach. Mr. Batten was very clear. He wanted to mirror Lega, he wanted to mirror the AFD, En Marche in France. We're going to talk about populist issues, we're going to talk about rape gangs, we're going to talk about Islam. That was his clear rallying, this is what I'm doing, will you back me on this? So what is Mr. Vachha's, this is my vision for UKIP, this is where we're going to be in British politics. Come along with me.
A libertarian party committed to freedom, committed to giving a voice to those people who hitherto have not felt they had a voice in politics, to get to the largest party potential, the none of the above party. More people vote for no party than vote for any party, and that's been the case in every general election going back to the year dot in Britain. So all of those people, they need a voice. They also need to have a party which they can feel proud about, which is not going to embarrass them by going down ridiculous avenues. And also this use of the word populist, which you deployed. It's hard for me to reconcile getting 1.2% in a general election, in a by-election, with being populist. It's called being unpopulist, as in unpopular. The people have spoken. This way doesn't work. The way that works is to speak to our essential core values, which are libertarianism, opposition to socialism, opposition to cultural Marxism, opposition to the mixing of religion, any religion, with politics, opposition to things which encroach invalidly upon the freedom of speech. Economically, libertarianism is a complete doctrine. It talks about complete freedoms. And I'm afraid to say that we have grown progressively less libertarian in the last 3.5 years within UKIP, starting our clock at a little bit before the referendum, when we were entirely referendum focused. And we started, in my opinion, perception maybe more important than reality, and here it's what I'm going by, that we already started the move in the wrong direction then. So it harks back to even those days. But now it's become, we are being seen as backing high tax socialist ideas. Leave that for Labour and the Lib Dems. We don't need to go for fruit like that. We're not interested in fruit like that. We're interested in paying people a fair wage for their work. This doesn't mean exploiting them. However, it doesn't mean having trade unions which are so powerful that no employer in their right minds would ever take on anyone if they could possibly avoid it. We're talking about a middle ground over there. It doesn't have to be extremes on everything. Certain things, yes, there will be extremes in terms of freedoms. Freedom for our parliament, no one else's, and certainly not the mock parliament in Brussels, to dictate our rules. On subjects like that, we will have the backing of the vast majority of the electorate. They're looking for reasons to vote for UKIP. Instead, we have kept providing them with reasons not to vote for us. This is crazy. We don't shoot ourselves in the foot anymore. We're certainly not going to do that if I have anything to do with it. I would support anyone who is willing to say, UKIP is there to fight for the underdog, to fight for preserving a way of life that is currently under threat. and it's under threat for a variety of reasons. One of them is the EU. But the EU is very, very central to everything, because until we get out of the EU, and this means a complete Brexit, not a half Brexit or a half-baked Brexit, it means a complete one, then we might as well not worry about the other things. I put this question to a number of people, including several wannabe leadership candidates. How do you prioritize matters in business? Typically the people I was speaking to have never really run businesses. They just haven't, and that's just a reality. Of it. And I've said, how do you prioritize matters? What do you decide to do first? When you're running a business, you always are faced with a scarcity of resources, whether the resource is your time, the resource is money, the resource is material, the resource is something else, or a combination thereof. How do you prioritize? The answer is very simple. Let's put the question to you. You've got to, because I'll pretend you are my competitors here, because they'll have a good chance to acquit themselves at hustings against me. What do you do first? Do you do what's easiest first or what's hardest first? Do you do what's smallest first or what's biggest first? Do you do what's most challenging first or least challenging first? Do you do what's most best PR worst, or do you do that last? How do you prioritize things when you're in an environment of having to make decisions and something is scarce? You have to do something first. What do you choose? Is that a fair question to you?
I'm not sure how to answer. Never run a company.
Well, surely it depends on the urgency of each question.
That answer is sort of typical of the ones I've got. No, the correct answer is you do first what has to be done first. And what has to be done first is getting out of the EU. Otherwise, we might as well talk till the cows come home about all the other things. We won't be able to achieve them. While we are subject to the shackles of the EU, we are powerless. Therefore, that has to be done first. And anything, absolutely anything, that jeopardizes our ability to get out of the EU properly. That means no surrender or vassalage treaty, perish the thought. A complete freedom. The freest, the best way of doing this is no deal, to be frank. Any deal with the EU would have to be subjected to the most penetrating of scrutinies, and especially if they've written it, because if they've written it, there are all sorts of traps and gotchas hidden within it. You can be sure of that. They've got lots of smart people. Barnier, his position was probably reserved as a future recipient of the Charlemagne Prize if he'd managed to pull it off and get Theresa May's treaty. Theresa May's treaty, which was clearly not written by a native English speaker.
I just saw a Telegraph article that's come out saying Emmanuel Macron has thanked Theresa May for being loyal to the EU in these negotiations. I'm thinking, could you think of a worse adjective to call someone who's trying to negotiate Brexit than loyal to the EU?
I don't know what to comment on whether Macron has given up his habits of a lifetime and decided to tell the truth for once, or whether it was just a slip. Or
I think it was leaked.
It certainly is true. Her prime loyalties are to the EU. Now, we also have Theresa in trousers, which is Mr. Hunt, who is a right tit. TIT is the suitable acronym for Theresa in trousers. I'm, again, not sure whether I trust him any more than I do Boris, or any less. Right now, we've got a whole lot of bad choices ahead of us, and we need just to focus on Brexit and getting out. Anything, bringing in, for example, talk about a particular religion or its small minority of followers who are absolute terrorists and murderers and scum who need to have the full weight of the law thrown at them. Anything which distracts from Brexit is bad. You prioritize by doing first what has to be done first.
Well,
what has to be done first is leaving the EU.
Because this is sounding incredibly like Nigel talking about UKIP and why he made the Brexit Party. You know, Brexit was the number one thing that had to be done. The caveat being, of course, he doesn't have any of your libertarian ideas. He has nothing other than just Brexit. So how do you defeat the Brexit Party as a leader if you would become one of UKIP?
If you're referring to me as Nigel in trousers, well, so be it.
Oh, no.
However, to say that I'm exactly like him, except that I'm a libertarian, is...
I'm only making the point
it
that
only make me laugh
your argument
because
is
it's
Brexit,
an enormous difference. Yeah. Yes.
Do you think there's a need to differentiate
my
ourselves?
Arguments against the EU are largely economic and libertarian ones. The EU is deeply anti-libertarian. It views libertarianism as one of the worst things possible. It is all in favour of organised markets, state-controlled, highly powerful-centred, no decentralisation, interference at every level. Bendy bananas was a joke, but only just a joke. What we can put in regurgitated offal, or whatever it is they want us to call sausages, is not a joke at all. But interference at every level.
We spoke about this on our previous video. These cameras, we have to reset them every 30 minutes because the EU just said so. We can't record otherwise. If you buy a camera anywhere else in the world, you can record for as long as you like, not a problem. And there's just weird niche things they have to deal with. But Damien's point was, how do you differentiate us? I mean, with Nigel going out there and saying Brexit's our big thing, that's the only thing. I mean, and Widdicombe said the only reason for the Brexit Party is for Brexit. How do we get on the front foot and say,
because we would be using libertarian approaches? We don't have former communists on our front bench, so to speak, to the extent to which we have a front bench and the extent to which the Brexit Party has a front bench, since neither party has any MPs at present. That is a gigantic difference. It's an elephant in the room which no one could ignore. No. The method we use to attack the EU is over its lack of libertarian principles, its anti-libertarianism, as well as its anti-democracy and so on. Of course, I'd be fibbing if I said there wasn't considerable common ground between us and the Brexit Party. But I know I'm genuine. I know I'm not going to give up this fight. I don't have a give-up switch. I will not yield to superior force. I probably don't consider it that superior. And my way of measuring superiority may not be the same as the other people's. If I'm morally right, I will continue.